Hello everyone and welcome to this week's video. Revelation, which we've been reading in morning prayer for the last week or two, is one of those books in the Bible that it's really difficult to understand. It's clear that much of the symbolism would have meant a lot more to those who first read it than it does to us. What we do know is that this type of literature was meant to be a comfort to those who first read it, particularly those who were experiencing persecution. In a sense, it peels back the veneer of our presenting reality to reveal the underlying forces and conflicts that shape events. It's difficult to summarise, but my attempt would be there is a throne in heaven and someone is sitting on it. Or alternatively, we've seen the end of the story and it ends well. The idea of Jesus ruling as king is a theme that emerges constantly. But the nature of that rule is surprising, considering the cataclysmic events that are described. Revelation 5:6, following a pretty conventional description of authority as you might normally understand it, mysteriously says, "I saw a lamb looking as if it had been slain, standing at the centre of the throne." This is not the sort of authority or dominion the Apostle John would have been used to as a political prisoner of a vicious despotic regime. It's the sort of authority Jesus demonstrated in the foot washing episode, where he clearly said, "The greatest among you should be your servant." Or when James and John's mother suggested to Jesus that they'd make great candidates for the forthcoming vacancies as Home and Foreign Secretary. In calming the understandable row that blew up amongst the rest of the disciples, Jesus said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you." These reflections on leadership and kingship come to mind this Sunday, the last in the Church's year, the feast of Christ the King. It has roots long ago in the writings of the Church Fathers, but was only added to the calendar comparatively recently by Pope Pius XI in 1925. I wonder whether a context of rising dictatorship and authoritarianism played into his decision. Surrounded by this sort of destructive, dysfunctional leadership, he wanted to remind us that there is a good authority, the authority of love and sacrifice, vested in the ascended Christ. Using authority well is a constant challenge for those who exercise it. What does it mean to lead through service? What does it look like not to lord it over people? This is particularly important to understand in the context of change. Our need to change as a church community was very evident prior to COVID. As we see some light at the end of the tunnel, the issues that have emerged for us make the challenge more urgent. If you carry on doing what you've always been doing, you'll carry on getting what you've always got. The challenge around our failure to reach the next generation with the gospel and our shrinking numbers are all too evident. Our natural tendency is to focus on things we have some power over. It's comparatively easy to jazz up your publicity. It's difficult, but not impossible, to attend to the pattern of our worship. But very few people are sitting at home with their Sunday papers thinking to themselves, "Oh, if only St. Gabriel's down the road got their worship style right, I'd be there like a shot." And we all know what we tend to do with junk mail through the post. The change we need is deep and complex. It does need to be led, but doing church is not like making widgets. In that endeavour, a few well-chosen interventions to change the production process are all that's required. Deborah Rowland, a great expert on change management, described the church as a complex adaptive system. It doesn't respond well to episcopal diktat. Change in a system like ours does need a fairly broad agreed intention, and I think we've done that process as a diocese. We've decided together that we are in the business of proclaiming Christ and growing disciples. We're not fundamentally a part of the heritage industry. We hope to become a more vibrant spiritual community or group of communities where people can encounter Jesus Christ for themselves. Alongside that, we need a broad set of boundaries or hard rules about how we're going to go about things. We're going to be outward looking and genuinely invitational, ordering our life to make space for others rather than be dominated by our own preferences. We're going to talk about money. We're going to be permission giving and experiment. But within those parameters, the how is going to have to be a matter for local decision, making as much possible. I was repeatedly struck in my prayer pilgrimage by the huge differences between churches in similar communities not that far apart. The culture of a place is a complex mixture of the personalities gathered, history and geography. It's simply not possible for a central authority to tell such a community what to do. The sort of change that can be created with a broad intention, agreed parameters and permission giving for local authentic experiment is much more likely to stick. At the moment, there are two major rocket systems vying for NASA's attention in going to Mars. One, the Space Launch System, is based on old technology, yet despite this it's cost tens of billions of dollars and hasn't even had a test flight. Each launch will cost at least $500 million and the rocket can only be used once. SpaceX, a new company, is working on a system which will be completely reusable, will cost $10 million per launch for the same payload. The first system is a perfect example of centrally dictated and controlled change. The second thrives on feedback, iteration, bold experiment, and an openness to see failure as a learning opportunity. On the current trajectory, it's the second one which will get to Mars first. As we go forward, I pray that we'll be more like SpaceX than the Space Launch System.